desert, not diving with Scuba.
Yeah, I mean, this comes to the final topic I want to talk about, which is the notion of art and culture, and popular culture in particular, and dance music as a part of popular culture, very specifically. I mean, you talked just there about doing stuff with an artist, an actual artist, because everyone in music is called an artist, but really it's an abbreviation of recording artist, which is not quite the same thing, I don't think. Generally speaking, over time, it's it's certainly applied to people who I would definitely say are not proper artists.
Yeah.
But of course, all of this depends on the definition of art that you're using, of course, and many people have an extremely wide definition, which it completely would. And if you're following that kind of thing, it would be reasonable to include anyone doing anything that could be considered to be creative, including any music to be that. I have to say, I'm not really. I have a bit of a more strict definition of art that I tend to. I've been trying to pin it down exactly, but my instinct is definitely to be more strict about what I consider to be arts. But talk a little bit about the approach to making music, which is functional. It's for something specifically, but it's also attempting to do something which is a bit more than that, if I can be woolly and not unspecific about this. Talk about how you think about that. Yeah, I mean, do you have a definition of art, for example? Well, where do you stand on that one?
Yeah, you mentioned that you have a little bit more of a strict definition. I tend to have a less strict definition, to be honest. I would say, for me, first of all, art is not objective. Art cannot be objective in my point of view. It's there comes a certain universal judgmental factor to art when you look at, for example, there is one good approach that I liked that I met during my studies when it comes to Immanuel Kant, and when he says that art cannot be objective, but there is subjective universality, universally, subjective universality.
Universality is what.
Universality, that's the word that I was looking for. I'm always in subjektive Universalität. And
okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. Real-time translation is,
which says that it cannot be objective, but there are subjective receptions that combine to some universal appearances and things that we can agree on, and that's kind of how I would say that art works. Because you could say that, for example, somebody like, do you know Joseph Beuys, the German artist that
Boyce?
Yeah. B with the Y, exactly.
Yeah.
He says that everybody's an artist, basically. Not in terms of like everybody can make great art, but it's an anthropological
this
potential.
is the kind of modernist, I think, take on it, right?
Yeah. And
I have to say, I have no time for that idea, but carry on.
No, I'm also not completely in that camp, but I see where he's coming from in terms of like, who defines it then? Like who says that this is like then really proper art? Like it's a problem. Who takes the right to judge then? If maybe then the subjective universality thing would apply. That yes, there I could agree with that there is some universal subjective judgment available, but that is not an objective definition of art in general. You can't say, okay, now I decide this is art. You can do it maybe for your own art, but I think it's difficult to just decide that for somebody else's art. And when you talk about this universality, what drives this universality? And I think it's connectivity. And connectivity, when you look at connectivity from a sociological viewpoint, like Niklas Luhmann's system theory, where it says that systems in a society, they are built on connectivity. And if connectivity creates subjective universality, for example, like because we have to agree upon, and this agreement comes in out of forums, out of reviews, out of ratings, whatever.
Yep.
How many people play it in the radio or on a DJ set or whatever. When we stay in music, those ratings, they depend on connectivity, and connectivity is something that changed because of social media. And there is a new way of judgment that is connected to connectivity. A different way of how we connect each other to come up with this subjective universality.
Right, to come up with things which are agreed, generally agreed, within society,
exactly.
and within groups of people.
And now this connectivity is built in a different way. It's built in a system that is numbers driven and metrics driven. So there has been a shift in how we understand subjective universality.
Subjective universality.
Universality.
I know, it's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah. Because we are more trained in looking at metrics and using metrics as an aesthetical judgment aspect, which it cannot be, because an aesthetical judgment is always subjective.
Right. Sure.
Like, how can you say that's aesthetically great and this is supposed to be true for everybody? How is that possible?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose underpinning that, and kind of, or either underpinning it or kind of like looming over it, is the difference between art and culture, or whether there is any subjective difference, whether there is any substantive difference.
I don't think so,
those
to
two
be
things.
honest.
Okay.
In my opinion, there is no substantial difference between these things, because sometimes something comes up as being culturally very, very relevant as art. Art comes out and it is kind of an amplificator for a cultural development, or a representation of a cultural development. Like, for example, some musical style that would maybe be representative for a cultural movement or something, like, let's say, the hip hop movement. But this also sometimes really comes out of the blue. It's nothing that was planned. There was this music being created, and you could call it this art, and out of that, a whole cultural movement was created. So I think it's very intertwined, and also in electronic music as well. I mean, I would say that, of course, subjectively, I would say, from my personal point of view, a lot of techno tracks are not art for me. But I wouldn't say it's not art in general, because whatever is art, I don't really even care about this label, to be honest. I don't even care if people call me an artist or not. Every time I say I'm an artist, I feel a little bit weird, and I don't say this in the understatement way. Not at all. I'm very confident about what I do. But
I think that sort of implies the baggage that the term art and artist carries with it.
That's true,
right? Because I mean, it does carry implication, and everyone, I think, has their own definition to some extent, but also I think has an idea that in some way it's inherently of value, right? And that the artist is someone to be, looked up to. It's almost like, Plato's philosopher kings. Do you know what I mean? It's like this is an example of someone who is doing something inherently almost unattainable to the average person, right? That's almost like the kind of the perception that many people have of someone who is considered to be an artist. And this is kind of like why I push back so strongly on the idea that anyone who works in the music industry on the creative side is an artist, because that doesn't fit, I think, with most people's perception of the definition of, forget about art, but an artist.
Yeah.
Right.
But as soon as you start like looking at the term a little bit more detailed, I think it's quite it kind of makes sense to look at it a little bit more, to look at the art term a little bit more differentiated in terms of, okay, are we actually putting too much weight on the term, and therefore putting too much weight on who or too much weight on the judgment of what is art, or can we actually agree upon, first of all, everything could be in theory art, because suddenly we have, for example, a Joseph Beuys installation of honey and dirt, for example, and it completely hypes up and everybody loves it, and it's in from Museum of Modern Art to Guggenheim or whatever, and then, I mean, what do you want to say then? It's not art?
Well, it's also like, you know, I mean, a commonly complained about example is Banksy, right? Who's just doing these stencils on a wall, and you know, opinions sharply divide on this, right? Yeah. Many people are extremely sniffy about it, and other people consider it to be, some of his works to be, you know, genuinely profound.
I mean, look at somebody who's just painting some pictures at home with a pencil. Completely meaningless stuff, maybe, in my point of view. But then if that stuff suddenly would gain subjective universality, what do you do?